Hello and welcome to another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement. I'm here at the News Forum where all voices matter. Well, of course, it is 2023, and I've invited Tom Caldwell back early to do a deeper dive on what to expect in this year, 2023. Tom is, of course, the chairman of Caldwell Securities in Toronto. Welcome back, Tom, and Happy New Year to you.
And to you as well, Tony.
As I said, I wanted to dig a little bit deeper. What are some of the things that people should watch out for in 2023 when it comes to the Canadian economy?
I tend to view the world through the lens of equity markets. That's primarily what I trade. There's lots of talk about recession. There are the geopolitical concerns. Concerns about interest rates, and obviously inflation. So these are much the same concerns as we've had through 2022. If I look forward into this year, one of the primary concerns seems to be recession or slowdown, to which my answer would be, it doesn't matter. You see, I've noticed one thing over the years. If I look into this year, where are the opportunities going to be? Where are the possibilities? And first off, recessions, slowdowns, they just come and go. But inflation is a permanent fact of life. It is a constant at some level.
Right.
And remember, even when it was at 2%, it was never 2%. I mean, the numbers are flawed. So I think the thing to keep in mind, we're going to have this battle for inflation, interest rates, they're still cranking them up. I would say as far as interest rates go, we're nearer the end than the beginning. We may have a few more increases, but we're getting to where I think the central banks want to be. I think inflation will possibly ease off somewhat. And as I mentioned earlier, recession, slowdown, we may have it. But if you look into this year, there's going to be a tremendous amount of spending going on. I mean, you mentioned Russia. All the world's military are running out buying new kit. The whole face of warfare, ground warfare, has been changed in the last year, and the equipment that people need is quite different than what they needed 2 years ago.
Right.
If you look upon Ukraine, it's much like Spain in the 30s. It's everybody gets a chance to try out their toys and see what's working and what's not working. And my heavens, everything has to be changed, whether it be with drones, or whether it be with cruise missiles. I mean, the Russians thought they would dominate in the air. They can't get a plane up without 15 missiles coming at it. So, and there's going to be money spent in electrification of everything. There's going to be rebuilding of infrastructure, shortening of supply lines. I've said this before. I don't think it's going to be as bad as people think it is, because that's my basic point.
Right. So when you're talking to people, your advice would be just sort of hang tight then?
No, I think my advice is more than that. In terms of, and again, I'm looking at it through the lens of equity market. As far as stock markets, that type of thing goes. You know, you and I, Tony, we're old enough to had things in our lives we've been very fearful of, I assume. I know about you, but I certainly have. And have you ever noticed the fear is usually worse than the real event?
Right.
Get through the real event. I think the fear of recession right now is pushing equity prices down quite a bit. And I think it's going to be greater than the real event. For example, I'm focusing more on the US, but I did buy some of the Canadian bank stocks recently. So what I'm saying is it's not hang in. I think there are opportunities here right now. I'll give you an example. I bought some Bank of Commerce. Now, Bank of Commerce has always been an ongoing disaster as a bank. There's not a financial crisis that they haven't missed. One of our advisors said they're always walking into sharp objects. But remember, Bank of Commerce is down about 35% last year. The dividend yield is a 6.10 or 6.2%. That's like almost 9%, 8.5% on a bond. And banks don't cut dividends. So I get a decent return. The stock is way down. So I can start nibbling at stuff like that. I'm just using that as an example.
Sure.
The Canadian banks, as I've said before, are a protected species. So there's stuff to do right now because we're looking forward. And my thesis is the fear of what's going to happen is worse than what's going to happen. And that's where the opportunities live.
Appreciate your analysis. We're going to take a brief break, Tom. We'll be back to you after the break. Please stay with us. And welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Tom Caldwell. He is the chairman of Caldwell Securities. Tom, let's talk a little bit more about the war in Ukraine. Obviously, that's almost a year old now, and it'll be grinding on this year. There's no question about that. You talked a little bit about what that means in terms of military spending, and I agree with you. What about things like energy costs and inflation?
Well, part of that is contrived. I mean, the part of the new religion of climate change is to get away from hydrocarbons into electrification. And eventually that's where we're going to go. But like all zealots, they tend to want to do it now. And that's where the challenge and that's where the opportunity lives. Now, I've noticed that natural gas prices in Europe have started to come down a little bit because they're getting LNG out of America now. They're just starting, and Qatar, et cetera. So they're making do in terms of keeping warm this winter. But energy costs are still going to be a feature coming from the hydrocarbon sector because it's too early to make the switch. We have to move in that direction, but it will take a degree of time. Europe, Chancellor Schroeder came to Canada and was really trying to get sources of liquid natural gas. And talking to the Prime Minister, he said, no, we can't do it, but we're going to give you hydrogen, that is Hindenburg fuel, in a couple of years, 10 years or so. And you can see the look in Schroeder's face. And think, these people are where they're not even in this world.
Right.
And I think he walked away quite disappointed. So they've had to get alternate supplies, and they're working that out. There's a lot of initiative. They're bringing some reactors back online, et cetera. But liquid natural gas is really environmentally friendly because as we export that, particularly to Asia, it replaces coal.
Right.
It is helping in the grand scheme of things, but nobody seems to have made that leap. So the energy prices are still remaining high. I still have a fulsome, the only things I own in Canada really are the Canadian banks, a couple of the banks I've just started to buy, and still the energy sector, right. The oil and gas sector, because I still think there's going to be another move upward in hydrocarbon energy prices, particularly in gasoline and fuel, not necessarily natural gas.
Do you think then that that Canada, when I say we, Canada missed an opportunity on the LNG front? Like maybe years ago, we had a chance to build LNG terminals and we didn't. They still haven't happened. Meanwhile, the U.S. and Qatar and others are jumping in to that market. Is that a huge missed opportunity for us?
Canada has never missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity. As you probably note, I have white hair. As long as I've been in the securities industry, there's been talk of LNG, either on the West Coast, where we have problems getting it through for all kinds of pressure groups, and on the East Coast, Quebec not wanting to have pipelines. See, the problem, without leadership, Canada has become a tyranny of minorities, and we don't get things done. So we've missed that incredible, screaming opportunity, culminated with the PM saying, there's not a business case for LNG, which is total vacuous idiocy, but how he got away with that. Nobody jumped all over that. I mean, it's just off the Richter scale. So the challenge with Canada is not that we're seen as a bad investment destination. We're not seen as an anything now. Right. I mean, if you might talk about, say, the Ring of Fire here in Ontario, I mean, that's been going on for 20 years as well.
That mining project on critical minerals you're referring, yeah.
Incredible. I mean, it's like Sudbury. It's a meteor hit that's very rich in mineralization. And for decades, we've been talking about building the road because it might interfere with the caribou or something like that. It's all this tyranny of minorities that we can't do stuff. So when you're thinking of a big project, there's not a resource company or a major corporation that would see Canada as a desirable destination unless they were given incredible benefits from governments to do so. So that's our challenge. Our challenge is we've got to start making decisions. We got to decide, are we a country or are we not a country? And if we are a country, what do we want to be when we grow up? And we're just hashing these things around, and the rest of the world has just moved on to other matters.
Yeah, and it's kind of sad. You're right. We've been talking about these things for years, if not decades, and we don't seem to be any closer to resolution on many of these things. And you're also right that while the world is turning to renewables, there's always going to be some kind of market for fossil fuels, and we're just not part of that discussion at all. We're going to continue our discussion, however, Tom. We're going to take a brief break again, and we'll be back after that break. Please stay with us. Greetings. We're back again here at Boom and Bust. I'm speaking with Thomas Caldwell, chairman of Caldwell Securities. Let's talk a little bit about China and the world economy, Tom, since we're talking about these big issues. Obviously, the biggest news over the past several weeks is the abandonment in China of the zero COVID policy, and now we've got tens of millions of Chinese who are getting COVID. What do you see as sort of the knockdown effects of all of these twists and turns in Chinese internal policy, and what that means for supply chains and manufacturing and these kinds of things?
Well, first off, being a dictator is really hard, because whatever gets messed up, you got to put a spin on it that it's not your fault. For example, the zero COVID policy, probably it didn't work. And then Premier Xi said, well, that's not our plan. It's the local governments have been too tough. It wasn't we planned. It's the local guys that did the problem. And then now they released the zero COVID policy, and COVID has sparked up. And now the stance is, well, you wanted your freedom and I gave it to you. The party was keeping you safe. So, you got to stay up at night thinking of reasons of how you can bob and weave against stuff. Listen, I'm not an expert on virology or any of this stuff, but what I would suspect is these shutdowns leave the virus in waiting. It's almost like you have to let it run its course and do its damage and literally run its way down, as literally all infectious diseases do over time. Right now, China is the enemy. They're trying to take the focus off of COVID and still focus on it. That's in the dictator's handbook. You got to have an external enemy. In this case, it's Taiwan. I think one of the good things to come out of the Ukraine is it's probably given President Xi pause to realize that any fool can start a war. You just don't know quite how they're going to end up. And Taiwan might be a tougher nut. Now, they can't resupply Taiwan. If they'd have a war there, it's a come-as-you-are affair, at least for the Taiwanese. But I think it's given him some pause to think in those terms. In terms of the embargoes, I think we still have to have constraints on people coming from China for a period of time. I don't know how that works out, but something like that should be in place. In terms of trade, China is now the bad guy, and we're going to keep banging. But the Israeli general Ariel Sharon had a wonderful line, and he was a hero. He was a very smart tactician, and he had a great line. He said, "Sooner or later, you've got to talk to your enemies, and sooner or later, we're going to be talking to China again, because the Chinese economy, whether this one belt, one road unifying all of Eurasia is going to work, China is going to be immense in size. And there's lots of bumps and wrinkles here dealing with them. But eventually, they're going to be such a dominant factor, we have to start talking to them again. In the meantime, you have all kinds of byplays going on. For example, I always keep telling people to have their iPhone. Well, you realize you are supporting a slave labor in Foxconn, and these people working 12 hours on, 12 hours off. So there's a whole bunch of rhetoric going on there, but eventually it's going to die down. Eventually we're going to be talking to them again, and eventually we're going to be doing business with them again.
Do you think that there are companies, though, that will alter their supply chains just because of the disruption that's going on in China these days?
Oh, definitely. And I think that's happening. And that's part of the reinvestment boom in the United States. And that's why I own a lot of the U.S. financial institutions, the corporate finance companies, everything from Cobra Kravitz right up to Morgan Stanley type of thing. They are shortening their supply lines. That's been one of the big lessons out of COVID and everything else. And, remember, yesterday's enemies to today's friends and vice versa. So I think there's a great movement to bring a lot of the supply into the domestic world, investment in semiconductors, et cetera, in the United States. So you're absolutely right. That is being shortened because of this period of time we're going through. The trade may look a little bit different. They'll still be shipping Furbies over for Walmart at some point in time, but
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know about the serious stuff.
Indeed, and I think there'll be other countries like Vietnam who are getting in on the supply chain shift as
Absolutely.
well. So I think Vietnam is a country to actually look at because I think they're going to be having a big boom over the next few years on this regard.
These are in Asia, these are industrious, hardworking people who want to build a better life. And, a lot of people say, well, the American worker is the greatest worker in the world. No, he's not, and she's not. No, that's not true. Just use the word GM, General Motors. That'll tell you exactly, versus Toyota. They're not. And like it or not, these are hardworking people. And yeah, they may work for less money, but remember, they can live for less money
Right, right,
as
right.
well. So yes, they're going to be a factor. All of that Southeast Asia will be.
And welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Thomas Caldwell. He is chairman of Caldwell Securities for our monthly chat. Tom, you've talked in the past about Canadian workers and their productivity issues. Maybe just to dive deeper into that a little bit, what exactly is the problem and is there a solution?
Well, first off, the Canadian worker is a really good worker. I mean, in the States years ago, you used to get a premium on Chevrolets made in Canada vis-a-vis Detroit. Canada is a wonderful country to start a business because there's people with a worldview, well-educated, wanting to work, at least the ones who want to go to work as opposed to work in the rec room. There's a little bit of a snide comment there, but, I think what happens is that it's harder to get from the small to the big. Canada has never been able to build, say, a world beater in technology. They always blow themselves up, whether it be the original Mitel or Nortel, BlackBerry. We just can't seem to get into the big game. I don't know whether that's a management problem, capital problem, or the size of our market, or attitudinal. I advised a young person who's in the soft drink business, had a plant based out of London, Ontario, and currently in Florida. And I suggested just build your business there because the attitude, let's make it happen. Government is not your friend in Canada. Make no mistake. I've been an entrepreneur. I've funded many, many companies over the years and created literally in well over the 100,000 jobs. Canada's a tough country. It's a small market with basically not obstructionist, but sometimes hostile government regulatory environments. It's very, very difficult. And the productivity is related to capital. It isn't how hard you work. And yes, you expect that. But it's, do you have that new equipment? Do you have those robotics? Do you have that investment? And as I said earlier, Canada is not seen as an attractive destination. And our productivity was quite high because remember, a lot of it was in the energy and the mining area, which is running down. I mean, if we have a mining project, you and I have a really great mining property, and we decide today we're going into production, it's going to be 15 years minimum before one shovel goes into the ground. You just know that. That's Canada. So that impacts profitability or productivity. Productivity is based on the machinery you have to do a better job at what you're doing. The caliber of the Canadian worker is very, very high on a world scale. And as they say, it's a wonderful country to start a business. This is not a good country to build it. And we have been unable, certainly in the technology area, to get into world beaters. I've traveled the world buying exchanges, as you know, and I never ran into another Canadian company anywhere in the Middle East, anywhere. We just sort of stay at home, and we're becoming more and more a branch plant country, if you will. You look at our countries that were icons when I grew up, they're all owned by somebody else now, somewhere else in the world. Inco, all the mining companies, et cetera, other than tech sort of thing. So I think we really have to look at having industrial policies. Industrial policies really make a difference. When I was a kid, I have more decades on you. If you bought something made in England, it was high quality. If you gave someone a gift made in Japan, it was junk. And now you look at it, it's totally reversed. And that was a result of industrial policies or the lack of industrial policies in the manufacturing area, we still haven't broadened out. We've got wonderful companies like Linamar, et cetera, that still go out there and really do a job in the world, but we can and should be doing a lot better because Canadians are so well regarded all over the world. We're not benefiting from that capital we have.
We got about a minute left. What can the Canadian government do or not do to help this situation?
Well, I would start by saying resign, but I think we need to take a fresh piece of paper and look at this thing. But I got to tell you, Tony, it's easy to be pessimistic, whether it be about governments or policies or anything else. I'm an optimist, and an optimist isn't someone who looks at the world through rose-colored glasses. It's someone who looks at opportunities in adversity. For example, oil and gas business when nobody likes it, kind of thing. It's sifting through the ashes and looking for opportunities. And I made a decision to be an optimist because I discovered years ago, or I observed, that optimists tend to be richer than pessimists. So I think that's the way to come at the world. Look at solutions, look at what can be done, and look at what you can do within the context. Because sadly, part of my job is taking side bets on what's going on in the world. And one of my biggest side bets is against government in Canada, and it's tended to work out as a pretty good bet these days. But we will solve that. Just like America. America will renew itself.
Right.
Canada will take longer. So stay on the optimistic side of the equation.
Well, on that happy note, that ends our time for today. Tom, always a pleasure having you on and looking forward to seeing you next month.
Terrific. All the best, Tony. Thank you.
All the best.